The alien world of Relora was filled with shining cities and powerful families, but at the very edge of one forgotten village lived a small child who did not belong. She was different from the others of her kind. While most alien children had bright silver skin and tall figures, she was small, fragile, and pale. To the eyes of her people, she was weak, and weakness was not tolerated in their society. Her parents had left her when she was too young to remember their faces. One day they were there, the next day they were gone, and she was left to survive among people who looked at her with cold stares. The other children laughed at her whenever she tried to join them. They pushed her away, calling her names that made her heart ache. She soon stopped trying. Every morning she walked alone near the broken fences outside the village. She liked to collect small stones and arrange them in little circles. It was her way of pretending she had friends to play with, even though she knew the truth. She would whisper to the stones, telling them her secrets. No one listened to her voice. No one cared about her words, but at least the stones did not laugh at her. At night, when the sky turned dark and the twin moons of Relora rose high, she would sit under a half-ruined shelter and stare at the stars. She wondered if somewhere far away, there was a place where children like her were not abandoned. She wondered if somewhere out there someone would remember her name. Her saddest thought was the one that returned every year. She did not even know when her real birthday was. On her world, birthdays were a great celebration, filled with music and bright lights. Children would gather around their families, they would receive gifts, and their parents would hold them close, saying how proud they were. But she had never felt that warmth. She had never tasted a sweet cake with a candle on top. She had never even heard her own name spoken with joy. One evening, when the village celebrated another child's birthday, she sat on the far side of the square watching. Laughter echoed around her. Music filled the air. The smell of food and sweet drinks carried through the streets, but no one called her to join. No one even noticed she was there. She hugged her knees and lowered her head, tears running down her cheeks. "I never had a birthday," she whispered, her voice breaking as the sound of fireworks filled the sky. Not once. Not ever. The more she thought about it, the more her heart burned with sadness. Why was she born if no one wanted her? Why was she alive if her existence meant nothing? The stars above gave no answer. The moons gave no comfort. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. She learned how to find food by searching the waste left behind by others. She learned how to stay silent so she would not be chased away. Her body grew thin, her face pale, and her eyes lost the spark of hope. But deep inside, a small flame still survived. A wish that maybe, just maybe, one day someone would notice her. One night, after another long day of loneliness, she lay on the cold ground, staring at the stars again. Her eyes were wet from crying. Her voice was weak, but she spoke anyway. "If anyone is out there, please hear me," she said. "I don't want riches, I don't want power, I don't want to be like the others. I just want one thing. I want to know what it feels like to be remembered. I want to know what it feels like to have a birthday." Her words were carried away by the night wind, lost into the silence of space. She closed her eyes, not knowing if anyone or anything could ever answer. To her it felt like speaking to emptiness, but still she hoped. Far beyond the stars, unknown to her, fate was already moving. The galaxy was vast, and her world seemed small, but change often begins in silence. For the forgotten child, a turning point was coming. She did not know it yet, but her wish had already found its way to ears that would finally listen. And so on that lonely night, the abandoned alien girl fell asleep with tears on her face, unaware that her life was about to change forever. The girl woke before the suns rose, her small body shivering from the cold ground. Her shelter was nothing more than a broken frame of metal and a torn sheet of fabric. Every morning began the same, a hunger in her stomach and an emptiness in her chest. She looked toward the village, where smoke from warm fires rose into the air. Somewhere behind those walls, families were together. Children were waking to voices of comfort. But none of that belonged to her. She walked slowly to the edge of the forest where tall red trees grew. The ground was damp, covered with moss that glowed faintly in the shadows. Here she found roots to chew and berries that kept her alive. Sometimes she saw wild creatures, but they always ran when she came near. Even animals seemed to sense she was alone, unwanted. When she returned to the village square, music still lingered from the night before. The people had celebrated long after she had fallen asleep, and now she saw the remains of their joy. Pieces of sweet bread scattered on the ground, empty cups rolling in the wind, ribbons of color hanging from doors. Children ran about, chasing each other with laughter. She stood at a distance, hugging herself tightly, wishing she could feel even one moment of what they felt. Her eyes stung, but she forced herself not to cry. She told herself that tears would not change anything. Yet the sadness inside was too heavy. As she turned to leave, a boy from the village noticed her. He pointed and shouted, "There she is, the pale one, the broken one." Others joined in, mocking her voice, copying the way she walked. She lowered her head and walked faster, but their laughter followed her like knives cutting into her heart. She ran until she reached the empty fields beyond the village. There she collapsed to her knees, clutching the earth. The pain she carried was not just hunger or cold, it was the weight of never belonging. Her tears fell silently one by one, soaking into the dirt. No one saw, no one cared, and that truth hurt more than any insult. As the twin moons rose that night, she returned to her shelter. She wrapped herself in the thin fabric and listened to the distant echoes of the village. Families laughed around fires, songs drifted through the wind, and she lay alone. For a long time she kept her eyes open, but finally tears blurred her vision. She whispered into the darkness, "Why was I born if I am not wanted? Why do I still live when no one remembers me?" She pressed her hands to her chest as if to hold her breaking heart. Her body shook with each sob, yet she tried to keep her voice low. She did not want the villagers to hear her pain, for they would only laugh again. So she cried into the silence, letting the stars be the only witness. But that night, something unusual stirred in the sky. As she wiped her tears, she noticed a faint light moving above the horizon. At first, she thought it was a falling star, a piece of fire racing across the heavens. She made a wish in her heart that someone, somewhere, might come for her. The light grew larger. It was not a star nor a comet. It was moving with purpose, slow and steady like a ship. Her tears stopped as fear and wonder filled her at the same time. No one else seemed to notice. The village remained busy with its songs, blind to the glowing object descending beyond the trees. The girl stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Her instincts told her to hide, yet her heart whispered to stay. She felt that whatever was coming carried the answer to her silent prayers. She had begged the stars for someone to remember her, and now the sky itself seemed to be answering. The ship lowered beyond the hills, its lights fading from view, but the memory of its descent burned inside her. She hugged herself tighter, her tears now mixed with a strange new feeling: hope. She did not know who had come or why, but she knew one thing with certainty. Her world of silence was about to change. As she lay down to rest, her thoughts no longer circled around despair. Instead, she imagined a figure stepping out of that strange light, someone who might finally see her, someone who might remember her name. The tears still ran down her cheeks, but they were no longer only of sorrow. They carried a spark of something new. For the first time in her life, the forgotten child dared to believe that she was not alone. The morning after the strange light crossed the sky, the alien girl woke earlier than usual. Her eyes were tired from crying, but inside her chest, something new was burning. A question she could not ignore. What was that light, and why did it feel different from all the other stars she had watched her whole life? She walked toward the hills beyond the forest, her small steps slow and careful. The ground was damp, her bare feet left light marks on the moss. As she moved deeper among the tall red trees, she felt the silence grow heavier. No birds sang, no creatures moved. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Then she saw it. Through the trees, in a small clearing, rested a shape, unlike anything she had ever seen. A silver vessel, smooth and shining with light still glowing faintly along its surface. The air around it smelled strange, metallic, sharp, and foreign. She hid behind a tree, her body shaking, her heart racing faster than ever before. For a long moment, nothing happened. She thought maybe the ship was empty. Maybe it had fallen from the sky without life inside. But then the door slowly opened, releasing a hiss of air. A figure stepped out, tall and wrapped in strange clothes. The figure was not like her people. The skin was different, the eyes deeper, the movement slower but strong. It was a human, though she did not know that word. Yet, to her he was only a stranger, an outsider from beyond the stars. The girl pressed herself against the tree, watching. Fear told her to run, but loneliness told her to stay. The human looked around the clearing, scanning the trees as if searching for signs of life. He carried something in his hands, not a weapon, but a small device that blinked with lights. His eyes were calm, not angry, not cruel like the villagers who mocked her. The girl's breath caught in her throat when his gaze turned toward her hiding place. She froze. The human tilted his head slightly, then raised one hand, not in threat but in greeting. His voice was deep yet gentle as he spoke words she could not understand. Still, the tone carried no hatred. She wanted to step forward, yet her legs refused. She wanted to run, yet her heart kept her rooted in place. Slowly, carefully, the human lowered himself to one knee, placing the strange device on the ground. He spread his empty hands wide, showing he carried no danger. The girl took a shaky breath. No one had ever approached her this way before. No one had ever tried to show kindness. Her people only looked at her with disgust. This stranger was different. Finally, with trembling steps, she moved from behind the tree. Her small figure came into the open, her pale skin catching the morning light. The human's eyes widened, not with fear, but with surprise and concern. He looked at her thin body, her tired eyes, her fragile frame, and he seemed to understand, her suffering without words. He spoke again, slower this time, his voice soft as the wind. She could not reply, but she felt the meaning in his tone. He was trying to calm her, trying to tell her she was safe. They stood there for a long while, silence stretched between them, broken only by the rustle of leaves. Then from his pocket, the human pulled out something small, food, a piece of dried bread, rough but warm. He held it out carefully, waiting. The girl hesitated. No one had ever shared food with her. Food was always something she had to steal, something she had to fight for. Her hands shook as she reached out, ready to take it, but then she stopped, afraid it might vanish like a dream. The human smiled, nodding gently, encouraging her to trust. At last she took the bread. It was dry, but to her it tasted sweeter than anything she had ever known. Her eyes filled with tears as she ate, not because of the food, but because for the first time in her life someone had given her something without cruelty. The human watched her carefully, and though she could not understand his words, she felt the promise in his presence. He was not like the villagers. He was not here to laugh at her or turn away. He was here for something more. As the sun climbed higher, the girl realized that her world had changed forever. The silent tears she cried last night had called someone across the stars. A stranger had come and he had seen her, but deep inside, questions still echoed. Who was he, and why had he come to her world? Would he stay, or would he leave her like everyone else? She did not know the answers yet, but she knew one thing with certainty. Her loneliness had finally been broken by the arrival of the stranger from the sky. The human stayed in the clearing for hours, making sure not to frighten the girl. He moved slowly, his actions calm as if he knew every sudden gesture might send her running. She sat on a stone a few feet away, still holding the last crumb of bread he had given. She stared at him with wide eyes, unsure if he was real or only another dream her lonely heart had created. When the sky darkened and the twin moons rose again, the human built a small fire. He stacked wood carefully, struck a spark with a tool from his pack, and soon flames danced in the night. The warm glow painted his face and chased away the shadows. The girl crept closer, drawn by the heat. She had never sat by a fire with anyone before. Usually she hid in cold silence, her only warmth the rags wrapped around her shoulders. Now, for the first time, she felt something close to comfort. The human pulled out a small metal container and cooked his rations. The smell rose into the air, and her stomach growled loudly. Embarrassed, she pulled her knees to her chest, but instead of laughing, the human offered her half of his meal. His eyes told her she was welcome to share. She hesitated, then accepted. The taste was plain, yet to her it felt like a feast. They sat together quietly, the crackle of the fire filling the silence. Though their languages were different, something deeper passed between them. The girl saw no cruelty in his eyes. She saw no disgust, no rejection. Instead, she saw patience, and that patience slowly opened a door inside her heart. She lowered her head and whispered almost too softly to hear, "I never had a birthday." The words slipped out before she could stop them. She bit her lip, afraid he might not understand, afraid he might laugh like the others. But the human leaned forward slightly, listening. His face showed no amusement, only concern. He spoke in his language, slowly, carefully, but she could not grasp the meaning. Still, his tone was gentle. She tried again, her voice breaking. "No one ever gave me one. No songs, no cake, no candle. Not once." Her hands trembled as she spoke. She had never told anyone this secret before. It had always stayed locked inside, her chest like a wound she dared not expose. But here, with this stranger, the words poured out, her eyes filled with tears. She explained in broken phrases, mixing whispers with gestures. She pointed to the village beyond the hills, describing how other children celebrated, how families gathered with gifts and joy while she hid in the shadows. She pressed a hand to her chest and shook her head, trying to show him that she had never been remembered, never been wanted. The human's expression changed. His eyes grew heavier, his jaw tightened, as if her pain struck him deeply. He said nothing for a long time, only looked at her with the weight of understanding. Then slowly he placed his hand over his own heart and nodded, as if making a silent promise. The fire crackled between them. The girl wiped her cheeks, ashamed of her tears, but the human did not look away. He did not mock her weakness. Instead, he shifted closer, enough that the warmth of the fire reached them both. He pulled a thin blanket from his pack and draped it across her shoulders. The gesture made her freeze. No one had ever given her such care. For the first time in her memory, she felt safe. She whispered again, her voice trembling. "All I wanted was one day, just once, to feel like I belong." The human looked into her eyes, and though they shared no words in common, she felt he understood. His silence was not emptiness. It was a vow. She could see it in the way his hand rested near hers, in the way his gaze softened. The night stretched long. Above them, stars glittered across the sky. The girl leaned slightly closer to the fire, her body wrapped in the blanket he had given. She thought of all the years she had hidden her pain, all the nights she had cried in silence. Now, for the first time, someone had listened. It was not just food he had given her, nor warmth, but something far greater. He had given her the courage to confess her deepest wound, and as the fire burned low, she allowed herself a thought she had never dared before, that maybe, just maybe, this stranger would be the one to give her the birthday she had always dreamed of. The fire burned low into the night, its last sparks glowing faintly against the dark forest. The girl had fallen asleep under the thin blanket he had given her, her face streaked with the remains of tears, but softer now, almost peaceful. The human watched her quietly, his heart heavy with the weight of what she had confessed. He thought about her words again and again. She had never known a birthday. Something so simple, so ordinary to him, was to her an unreachable dream. The idea of a child never being celebrated, never being remembered, cut deeper than any wound he had faced in his travels. He had seen war, famine, and emptiness across worlds, but this loneliness was different. He stared at the stars above, the same stars she had whispered her wish to. In his mind, a decision formed. He could not erase her years of pain, but he could give her at least one moment of joy. He could give her the birthday she had always longed for. The next morning, before the girl woke, he began to gather what little he had. His supplies were limited, meant to last him during his journey, yet he searched carefully through his pack. A ration bar, dry and plain, but sweet enough to pass as a cake. A small wax stick from his emergency kit, sharp at one end and flat. At the other, it could serve as a candle. And his lighter, a tool for fire, could make the tiny flame she had dreamed of. He looked at the rough collection in his hands and smiled faintly. It was not much, not even close to the grand celebrations her people once held in their villages. But it was something, and sometimes, something was enough. The girl stirred awake, her eyes blinking against the light of the twin suns. She saw him crouched near the ship, busy with his strange tools. Her heart jumped with fear at first, thinking he might be leaving. She rushed closer, clutching the blanket tightly, but when he turned and saw her, he shook his head gently and raised a hand in reassurance. He was not going anywhere. He gestured for her to wait, pointing at the ground near the fire. Confused but obedient, she sat down. She watched him work, her head tilted slightly as he arranged the ration bar carefully on a small metal plate. He pressed the wax stick into the center, balancing it with careful precision. Then he placed the plate on a flat rock and looked at her. She frowned, unsure of what he was doing. He smiled, nodding as if to say, "Trust me." He picked up his lighter, flicked it, and a small flame sparked into life. The wax stick caught the flame at its tip. The candle burned weakly, but the glow was steady. The girl gasped. Her eyes widened as she realized what he had created. A birthday cake, small, imperfect but real. Her hands flew to her mouth and her chest rose sharply as tears returned, not from pain this time, but from something she had never felt before. Joy. The human pointed at the candle, then gestured with his breath, showing her to blow it out. She looked at him in disbelief, her lips trembling. For a long moment she did not move, afraid the image would vanish if she touched it, but his eyes were steady, encouraging her. Finally, she leaned forward. She closed her eyes, whispering a wish so quietly that even she could barely hear it. Then she blew. The candle flickered, then went dark. The silence that followed was heavy, yet filled with meaning. She opened her eyes slowly and saw the faint trail of smoke rising from the candle. She had done it. She had made a wish. She had celebrated her first birthday. The girl burst into tears, but these were not silent tears of sorrow. They were loud, shaking sobs of release. She laughed between her cries, covering her face with her small hands. For the first time in her life, her heart felt seen. She was not invisible anymore. The human reached out, placing his hand gently on her shoulder. She looked at him through blurred eyes and whispered, "Thank you." Though the words were not in his language, he understood. He smiled, his own eyes shining with emotion. He had traveled across worlds for duty, for survival, for exploration. But in this moment, he realized he had found something far greater: purpose. Girl touched the ration bar cake carefully, as if it were the most precious treasure in the universe. She held it close, whispering to herself, "My birthday." The human nodded, his heart filled with quiet pride. He had kept his silent promise, but deep in his mind a thought lingered. If something as small as a cake could change her world, what else could he give her? He knew this was only the beginning, and as the two of them sat together in the clearing, the tiny candle still smoking beside them, a bond had been forged, one that no distance of stars could ever break. The candle's smoke drifted into the air, curling like a thin ribbon against the light of the twin suns. The girl sat frozen, her small hand still covering her mouth. She had blown out her very first candle. For a moment the world around her seemed silent, as if even the forest held its breath to honor what had just happened. Her chest rose and fell quickly, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were not born of sadness. These were tears she could not control, tears that felt warm instead of cold. The human watched her closely, his eyes soft, his hand still resting lightly on her shoulder. He did not need words. His expression carried everything she needed to know, that this moment was real, that this was hers to keep forever. She reached out with trembling fingers and touched the ration bar with the candle still pressed into its center. To anyone else it might have looked small, plain, even laughable. But to her it was more beautiful than any treasure. For the first time in her life she felt like she mattered. The girl whispered to herself, "My birthday, mine," as if she was afraid the world would try to steal it from her. She looked up at the human again, searching his face to be sure this was not just a dream. He gave her a gentle nod, confirming what her heart longed to believe. The human then clapped his hands softly, smiling. It was a gesture she had never seen before, but it made her laugh through her tears. The sound of her own laughter startled her. It felt strange, fragile, yet wonderful. She could not remember the last time she had laughed, if she ever had. The fire crackled beside them. The girl wiped her face and then leaned closer to the cake. Her lips moved silently, repeating the wish she had made before blowing out the candle. She would never speak it aloud, but in her heart it was simple. "I wish I will never be alone again." The human reached into his pack once more. He pulled out something shiny, a small piece of metal shaped like a coin. It was nothing more than a token, but he pressed it into her hand, curling her fingers around it. He pointed at her chest and then back at the coin, as if to say, "This is yours, always." The girl held it tightly, her fingers refusing to let go. No one had ever given her anything before, not food, not gifts, not love. And now she had two treasures, a birthday cake and a token of belonging. She whispered, "Thank you," though her words were broken and soft. He could not understand her language, but her tone carried enough. His smile deepened and his eyes gleamed with the same emotion she felt inside. Time seemed to move slower after that. They ate the ration cake together, each bite shared as though it were the finest dessert in the galaxy. She giggled once more when crumbs stuck to her lips, and he handed her a piece of cloth to clean them. Small gestures, ordinary moments, yet, for her they were miracles. As the day passed, the girl found herself speaking more. She told him small pieces of her life using gestures and simple words. She pointed to the village on the horizon, then shook her head, showing how they had rejected her. She touched her chest, whispering about her loneliness, then pointed to the cake, smiling through tears. The human listened to every word, nodding with care as though her voice was the most important sound in the universe. When evening returned, the stars spread across the sky once more. The girl lay near the fire, her head resting on the blanket he had given her. She stared at the stars differently now. Before they had always seemed distant, cold, unreachable. But tonight they looked alive, warm, almost as if they were celebrating. "With her?" she whispered again. Not to the stars this time, but to herself. "I am not forgotten." The human sat nearby, keeping watch as she began to drift to sleep. He knew that this was only the beginning. She had lived years of silence, years of pain, and one birthday could not erase all of it. But he also knew what he had seen in her eyes. Hope. That small flame was brighter than any star in the sky. As her breathing slowed and she fell asleep, she clutched the small coin tightly in her hand. Her face still carried streaks of tears, but now her lips curved into a faint smile. It was the first smile born not from hiding pain but from feeling loved, and in that moment under the watchful sky, the forgotten alien child became something more. She was no longer invisible. She had her first birthday. She had her first memory of being cherished, and she would never lose it. The morning light touched the forest gently, painting the trees in shades of red and gold. The girl opened her eyes slowly, her small hand still clutching the coin the human had given her. For a moment, she thought it might all have been a dream. The cake, the candle, the laughter. But when she turned, she saw him sitting nearby watching the sunrise. Her heart lifted. It was real. She sat up, holding the coin close to her chest. The human turned toward her, his face calm and steady, and gave her a small smile. It was a simple gesture, but it warmed her more than any fire. For the first time in her life, she woke not to silence but to the presence of someone who cared. They shared a quiet morning meal. He gave her the last piece of his fruit ration, saving only a small bite for himself. She noticed, and her eyes softened with gratitude. She whispered in her language, "You see me." The words were meaningless to him, but the emotion carried enough. He nodded as if he understood. The girl's thoughts returned to the village beyond the hills. She remembered the cold faces, the cruel laughter, the years of rejection. Part of her wanted to show them what she had now, that she was no longer invisible. But another part of her knew she did not need them anymore. What she had found was far greater than their approval. Later that day, the human led her to his ship. She followed nervously, her heart racing as she stepped inside. The walls glowed with soft light, machines hummed with gentle rhythm, and she stared in awe at things she could not name. To her, it was like stepping into another world. He showed her a seat near the control panel. She sat carefully, her small hands gripping the edge. He pressed a few buttons and the ship's screen came alive with stars. The galaxy stretched wide before her eyes, endless and brilliant. She gasped loudly, her breath caught in wonder. She had always looked at the stars from the ground, imagining their secrets. Now she felt closer to them than ever before. The human pointed at the stars, then at her, then at himself. It was his way of saying what words could not, that the universe was vast, but they were together in it. Tears welled up again in her eyes. She whispered, "Not alone." She pressed the coin tightly in her hand, as though it were proof of everything that had changed. As the day faded into night once more, they returned to the fire outside. The girl leaned against him cautiously, her head resting near his arm. At first she thought he might push her away, as the villagers always had, but he remained still. He let her stay. Slowly, her body relaxed, and she felt something she had never felt before. Safety. The forest grew quiet. The stars filled the sky again. The girl looked up, whispering softly, "I wished." And the stars answered. The human glanced down at her, his eyes reflecting the flames of the fire. He did not understand her words, but he understood her meaning. He reached out and placed his hand lightly on her back, steady and protective. That night, before sleep took her, she thought of all the lonely years she had endured, all the nights of silent tears, all the days of hunger and rejection. They no longer felt like chains. They felt like steps that had led her here, to this moment, to this bond. When she closed her eyes, she did not whisper to the stars anymore. She whispered to herself, "I am not forgotten. I am not alone." The human kept watch as she slept, his gaze on the stars. He knew he could not stay forever. His journey would call him elsewhere. But he also knew he could never abandon her. Their lives were tied now in a way that went beyond words, beyond worlds. The galaxy was vast, but in that forgotten clearing on Relora, something greater than space had been born. A bond between a human and an alien child. A bond made from kindness, from hope, from one simple birthday cake. And though countless stars burned across the sky, none of them shone brighter than the small flame that now lived in her heart.